As I was taking the returns that evening, there were, I believe it was six ladies in total that came up and demanded that I give them a ride to their hotel, saying things to me like, "Oh, you're a taxi service. You can just give us a ride. It's no big deal. Just give us a free ride." I wasn't a taxi driver, so it would have been illegal for me to accept money and drive people around. They're not taking no for an answer. At this point, they inform me that, hey, we have a gun, so you're going to do what we want.
Hey gang, if you're listening to this right now, odds are you watch videos on the main channel and you've seen how important speed and accuracy are in a gunfight. That's why Active Self-Protection recommends the Range Tech Shot Timer. It's the lowest cost shot timer on the market that we're aware of, Bluetooth compatible with any Android or iOS device. More features than any other shot timer. You can store all your data on the cloud for free. That's free. Native integration with Practice Score and a visual light-based go signal. Visit them at rangetechtimer.com, rangetechtimer.com, and tell them your friends at the Active Self-Protection Podcast sent you. Alrighty, gang. This is take two for me and Tyler. Welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I remain your favorite former Fed. My name is Mike Williver. With us today is a man who lives out in the wilds of Alaska, out literally in the middle of nowhere, building his own cabin, living off the land, living the dream. His name is Tyler Offenbaker. Tyler, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No worries. So he's
glad that I could actually connect with you.
Yeah. So he's literally in the middle of nowhere and has very limited internet. So this may be a little bit of a stop-start deal, but it's a story worth telling. So we'll keep it relatively short since the signal is so sketchy and unstable. So you live approximately where in Alaska? If someone looked at a map of Alaska, where does Tyler live exactly?
I live just north of Healy, Alaska. I'm about an hour north of the Denali Mountains and about an hour south of Fairbanks.
Okay.
I live in Clear, Alaska is the name.
So tropical, balmy, probably surrounded by palm trees?
Nonstop, of course.
Yes. All right. So you were, when the incident happened, we're going to try to time this this time. We had a previous guest who was on, who sent in a video, and then John broke that down, and I was supposed to talk to him, and it just never, our signals got crossed, so I'm hoping to catch up with that guy. But in your case, you sent me a video that occurred back when you lived in New Orleans, Louisiana, several years back, and that's what we're going to talk about, and hopefully time this so John can release that video on the main channel, and everyone can see them and hear them both at the same time. So before we talk about that, before this incident, were you a firearms carrier? Did you train with guns, self-defense, martial arts, anything like that?
No, no law enforcement background or anything of that nature. I only began carrying when I lived in New Orleans because of the dangers that I ran into there. And actually, at the request of the owner of the business that I was working for, where this took place.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the comedian Tom Segura, but he has a whole comedy routine about if don't live anywhere where they film the show The First 48. And the show The First 48 has a ton of episodes from New Orleans, Louisiana. I've been there once. Very lovely people, kind of a weird vibe, not really my scene, but God bless you if you're in New Orleans listening or watching. Please continue to do so. So the incident at hand happened when you were employed. One of your jobs anyway was at a car rental agency. What was your job there? What was your main thrust of what you did? Were you like a clerk? Were you a mechanic? What did you do there?
I was the mechanic and also the night returns manager. So when they would come and return the vehicles at the end of the day, I would collect them and then check them over for damage and see if I had to do any repairs or anything before that we could send them out the next day, basically. So when the video takes place, it's at night when I am working basically the night shift, taking those returns and checking them over for damage, yada, yada, yada.
Okay, I got you. So you're in there, and the video starts pretty much. The video you sent me starts pretty much when the incident starts. So people come to the door and approach you, and tell us what happens after that.
So as I was taking the returns that evening, there were, I believe it was six ladies in total that came up and demanded that I give them a ride to their hotel, saying things to me like, "Oh, you're a taxi service. You can just give us a ride. It's no big deal. Just give us a free ride." I tried to explain, of course, that we're not a taxi service. I'm a rental agency. I can't drive you around. That's illegal for me to do. All the shtick that we have to tell people because it was actually. I wasn't a taxi driver, so it would have been illegal for me to accept money and drive people around.
So
Well, anyway, they're not taking no for an answer. At this point, they inform me that, hey, we have a gun, so you're going to do what we want.
wow. Okay.
So I didn't actually believe that they did at that time. And that's really when the video starts, is the moment when they had informed me that we have a gun, you're going to do what we want. And me not thinking that they actually have a gun at that moment in time.
So did they say did one of them say I have a gun, or just someone just announced someone in this party or multiple people in this party have guns? And yeah, did you so you didn't take them seriously at all? They were just like you were just like, well, this can't be true. This isn't real because they look like kind of normal people. They don't look like hardened criminals in the video.
It's been so long now that I can't recall if they specifically said, if one specifically said I have a gun, or if it was someone that just said we have a gun or guns. You know, it but yeah, it again, it's been so long, I can't be 100% on that, how that exactly played out there. But the one by the door was kind of like, giving the direction to everyone else. Everyone else had kind of backed away already and given up and sort of left out the door, but the one had remained, and she was the one, really pushing the point, not giving up.
Did they seem drunk or high to you? I mean, I know a lot of people get and stay drunk in New Orleans. Was that the case, or did they seem like they were perfectly sober?
Extremely drunk.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, that explains some of it then. So the person who ended up having the gun was she was inebriated as well.
Yeah, and she's holding a box of food, as you can see. You can't see the other ladies that are already outside, obviously.
Hmm.
I believe, if I recall correctly, that one of them had one of the large fishbowl drinks with them in hand at the time. So, I mean, very clear that they were consuming large amounts of alcohol, which is pretty much par for the course every day for dealing with tourists in New Orleans,
Right.
honestly.
Okay, so at some point you either see a gun. Does she produce the gun, or do you see that she has it, and then what happens?
Well, as I approach, not thinking that she has an actual gun, just thinking that, hey, if I walk up to her and maybe gently guide her out the door, we'll be done. That's when she kind of made a movement toward her belly, and I realized that it was sticking out of the waistband. And instantly, as soon as I saw it, I just grabbed it, put it behind my back to get it out of her arm's reach, and then just shoved her on out the door.
So when you see it, are you seeing it like tucked in the waistband or in a holster? And what kind of gun was it?
It was tucked in the waistband, just loose, no holster. I don't even recall what actually kind of gun it was. All I remember was instantly thinking that if I tried to use this, it might explode in my hand.
Oh, okay, so a total piece of junk.
It was that bad.
Okay. So you tuck it in your into your waistband. Could you tell? So was it? Could you tell us? Was it a revolver or a pistol, like a semi-automatic pistol?
It was a semi-automatic pistol, small. It was either uh, 380 or a 9 millimeter. But I remember as I sit down at the desk, I actually check it over at that point and realize, fully loaded, safety off, ready to rock and roll. But it was just rusty as all heck. Pretty sure the serial numbers were scratched off, as I recall. Just clearly a throwaway whatever gun. you know,
Yeah,
the epitome of all
during
that.
my years in law enforcement, people we catch with guns who weren't allowed to have guns would frequently say, "Oh, I found this. I found this on the street, and I picked it up to prevent a small child from picking it up and having an accident." What you're saying is this person may have actually found this gun lying in the gutter. That's how bad it was.
I would actually believe them if they told me that.
Okay. So once you take the gun away, you secure it and you push her out the door. I assume you lock the door. Do they stick around and object, or do they just take off?
This is when it comes to some of the best part of the story, in my opinion. I call the police, and I'm dealing with the New Orleans Police Department, which are not very speedy in their response time. Their precinct is maybe 2.5 blocks
Hmm.
from where the incident is taking place. It took them about 2 hours to actually be on scene from my first 911 call. During that entire time, they stayed and kept trying to kick the door in because they wanted their gun back.
Wow, 2 hours is a long time. Now, I was going to say, if they had left, if these people had wandered off in defeat to go have another beverage, I'd understand why this wasn't, the top priority call because there could be, crimes in progress. But if they're still there outside of a glass door, uh, beating on the door, I think that would demand a little quicker response, don't you think?
That's what I felt too. I had to call 911 a few different times, actually. I believe it was a total of 5 times. And on the last call, I told them, if they kick this door in, I am unfortunately going to have to shoot one or more of them. So please come,
And did that get their
because
attention?
that's the point we were at. I believe that finally did it.
Okay, very good. So the what sorts of things are they saying to you as you're standing on the other side of the glass door? Like what are they, just generally speaking, what are they saying? Are they threatening you? Are they just saying we're gonna break the glass, or what are they telling you?
Oh, no one specifically said breaking the glass, but just kicking the door, yelling insults at me about, being a whatever, pick your poison on that. I don't recall the specific terms they chose, but just yelling at me and asking for the gun back. You know, there was a point when they did pause and try to be nice and ask real nicely, but then after about 5 minutes, went right back to kicking at the door again.
Right.
Uh, I used to actually have the full version video of this, but over 7 years, lost to time and a dead computer, as I recall.
Right. So the police show up eventually. And what is their response? Are they super casual? Are they coming in with guns drawn, or what were they doing?
Oh, of course, the New Orleans police just shows up casual, like nothing's going on. Talks to them like they're any old tourists. Don't really actually take the whole situation very seriously, in my opinion, which was unfortunately typically my interactions with them. Uh, anyway, once they did actually come to the conclusion that a felony had been committed here, they did actually arrest the woman who had the gun and detained the others and took them to the station with them. Uh, I believe they let all the other ones go after just a short while, and then charges were pressed against the one that actually had the gun.
And what was the dispo of that? Did they follow up? Was she convicted of something, or what happened? Do you know?
As I recall, she was convicted of possession of the firearm. But exactly what happened after that, I don't recall. Again, lost the time in my head on that one, but probably could look it up.
Okay, so looking back on this now with hindsight, um, now that you know she had a gun, whether or not it was very operable, we don't know. Maybe not, but if you so
Yeah.
say they walk in and you were 5 feet away and you see the gun as if she's telling you, one of us has a gun, I have a gun, whatever. You see the gun and you're now a distance away. Do you move in and take it in retrospect, or do you just do what they tell you to do? Now that you know, because initially you said, well, I didn't think they were serious. I was just moving in to move her out of the way. Let's say you did see it. Does anything change in your calculus?
I think honestly, I thought about this after it did happen. That once I was standing up, the best thing to do would have been to close the distance, no matter what. Had I been at the desk, different decisions would have been made.
Okay, so potentially, had you seen the gun initially while you're behind the desk and access to your gun, you would have drawn your gun versus moving in on it. That makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
so I think if we're going to divide any lessons out of this, I think the number one thing is if someone, and I say this about police encounters all the time, when the police are, if you're dispatched as a police officer to a man with a gun call or somebody shooting shots into the air, walking down the street with a gun, whatever, it's best for you to assume the worst. So assume that that's what's happening and approach it that way until you're proven wrong and you find out it is something else, or fireworks, or just a guy yelling and screaming and they just told the dispatcher he had a gun to get the police out there faster. Assume that it is the thing they're saying it is. So in your case, I think had things been different, had you seen the gun sooner, you would have just known there was a gun and acted appropriately. But uh, I think if someone says, "Hey, we have a gun," I would say it's safer to assume that they do and act appropriately than not. But I can understand In your situation, it's a little different because these are very drunk, looking like regular normal people, like not thugs or street criminals or whatever. So them saying that might have, I think you probably thought that was just a drunk utterance. Like, okay, you got a gun. Sure you do. Is that where what's going through your head?
Yes, and dealing with so many drunken people, basically, an endless stream of them
Yes.
coming by with any level of nonsense coming out of their mouths over the course of my time there. I think I got a little bit complacent, maybe, is something else that I just, hey, yeah, sure you
Right.
do, because so many people say things like that there in their drunken stupidity. So I maybe allowed myself to get too complacent there is a lesson that I would put out there. Never be complacent. Like you said, assume that they are telling you the truth when they say they have the weapon.
Sure. But again, it's a nitpick. I think you did an admirable job. So hopefully we can get this episode of the podcast out the same day that John breaks down that video. I'm going to cut this one a little bit short because you're starting to pixelate on me, and I don't want to have to restart this interview again. And fortunately, I have more people to interview today because
Yeah, man, understood.
you good people in the audience are writing in and giving me stories and documentation. So I'm very pleased. If you are watching or listening to this, do me a favor and go check out the review section and leave us a 5-star review and say some nice words. And we appreciate you. Thank you so much. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Gutowski Files, starring Stephen Gutowski. He is the founder of the Reload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. And I did not get a chance to listen to this week's podcast guest every week with the opening, I'm getting old. I did not get a chance to listen to this week's podcast just yet. Do you want to tell our viewers and listeners who was on this week and what you guys talked about?
This week, we had former federal prosecutor and current criminal defense attorney Ken White, who also operates under the name Popat. He's a prolific commentator as well, and he hosts a podcast called Serious Trouble that looks at high-profile people who are in serious trouble. And anyone who listened to the Ask podcast last week knows that we had a high-profile person who was in serious legal trouble by the name of Hunter Biden. And so I wanted to have on an expert who actually could explain how the federal system works, what these charges mean, what the deal means, how it's all the ins and outs of it, whether this deal is fair or not. We got into a little bit of that last week on this podcast, but this is more of a deep dive, 45-minute overview of the whole situation, plus the politics of it too, because obviously you can't ignore that when you're talking about Hunter Biden and his dad and all the implications there. So
yeah,
I think it's a good episode. I think we tried to be as fair as possible.
Sounds interesting. So tell the folks where they can find that if they're looking for it.
Yeah, just look up the Weekly Reload podcast on any of your favorite podcasting apps or over on YouTube.
And there's clips over at YouTube as well, so go check that out.
Yep.
At their YouTube channel. So this week we are discussing. There's a number of stories about this topic that are all a little shade different than the other ones, but this is a newsletter deal. Senate balks at pistol brace ban repeal. I think most of us probably thought that the Senate was somebody was going to come over from the Democrat side, at least one or two people, to defeat that and get it overturned or whatever you call it when they undo an executive order. That didn't happen. So talk to us about that, Stephen.
Yeah, well, so this had passed the House, right? They got the resolution to undo the ATF's pistol brace ban through the House. And so it went to the Senate. Now, normally I think people might be confused as to why this even came up for a vote, right? If it didn't have Democratic support, because Democrats control the Senate. And generally speaking, on any other kind of legislation, you'd not only need to get 50 votes for that to move forward, but you'd really need to get 60 so you could break a potential filibuster.
Mm-hmm.
And this didn't even get to the 50 vote mark. So how did this even become a thing? Well, this is the Congressional Review Act resolution, which means that it's a privileged motion. So the Senate has to do an up and down vote if the House passes one of these. And that's how you've seen a couple of times, actually 5 times since Republicans took back control of the House, where Joe Biden has had to veto things, even though the Senate is controlled by his party. And that's because of these CRA resolutions where basically if you get 51 votes or 50, well, really you need 51 because the tiebreaker is the vice president, who is Kamala Harris. And so if you get to 51, that will go through to the president's desk. And of course, he's still bound to veto it at that point anyway, because the Congressional Review Act is looking at executive branch rulemaking, like what the pistol brace ban is, and saying Congress doesn't approve of this. But the executive branch is controlled by the president, and so he's obviously probably not going to agree with that idea. But in this situation, it seemed like a pretty good thought that they would be able to get 51 votes, at least 2 Democrats to come over. Every Republican ended up voting for this. None of the moderate Republicans defected on this question, but all the Democrats hung together too. And I think that was surprising to Republicans. The sources that I had on the Hill that were talking about this, multiple sources thought it was going to get a couple Democratic votes. Democrats were, when I reached out to their offices ahead of the vote, were pretty cagey about it. They didn't say anything.
Interesting.
Manchin's office said he was considering it, but he hadn't made a decision. And then when it came down to it, every Democrat voted against it. And I was surprised too, honestly. I thought it was going to get to 51.
Yeah. So besides, I think Manchin's always the kind of the one senator that you go to in your mind when you think this guy might vote with the Republicans. He's kind of the go-to. Who would any of the others have possibly been? Who would they have been lobbying to get to vote on this on the Republican side?
Yeah, well, you also have Tester from Montana, who's opposed to things like an assault weapons ban. You've got King, who's technically an independent, but he caucuses with Democrats, from Maine, who was part of the group that blocked David Shipman from becoming ATF director earlier on in Biden's presidency. You also have Kirsten Sinema, who is now an independent, still caucuses with Democrats, but is also somebody who's maybe a little more on the swing side when it comes to the gun issue. And even Maggie Hassan would be another one that has their son. Anyone who's really in a purple or red state and is a Democrat is somebody that you could target with a bill like this, because the thing is, like, this isn't background checks. It's not, something along those lines. This was effectively a gun ban, right? I will say Manchin himself, when he explained his vote, said it's not a ban, that it doesn't ban pistol braces, because technically you can still register and keep them. But the practical effect is that millions of gun owners now have unregistered NFA items, according to the ATF, which is a felony, right? Very few people actually registered their pistol braced guns. And so as things stand today, this rule has banned possession of those items because they weren't registered in time.
Yeah. So for those at home who don't have their finger on the pulse of the firearms community, NFA's National Firearms Act, which was passed back in the 30s. We talked about this before, largely in response to all the gangster stuff going on and all the weapons they were using to do their dirty deeds. Pistol brace itself, just if anyone doesn't know, is basically a brace invented by, who was it invented by, Stephen?
Alex Bosco.
Yes.
SB Tactical.
Yeah, and just talk to our audience about what it is and why it's important.
Yeah, so this goes back to the NFA. The National Firearms Act regulates what are called short barrel shotguns and short barrel rifles. And this was actually sort of a vestigial section of the bill, because there had initially been, my understanding of how this all went down in 1934 when this act was passed, is that there had been alongside, so the NFA regulates things like silencers and machine guns, right? But it also regulates short barrel rifles and short barrel shotguns. Initially, there was a handgun ban in there for all handguns. And the short barrel shotgun and short barrel rifle provisions were meant to be sort of prevent somebody from making a handgun out of a rifle or a shotgun by just sawing down the barrel to a more concealable length like you would have with a handgun. And so when they removed the handgun ban from the NFA before it passed, they didn't remove these portions. And so you will hear, including Manchin, supporters defend this as the idea is supposed to be that short barrel shotguns and rifles are concealable, which I think anyone who has ever handled one knows that's not remotely true.
I mean,
true,
more
right?
concealable than a long barrel, obviously, but I mean, it's not like you can just like put it in the holster on your hip or something.
No, you're not fitting a SBR down your pants and walking around town with it, right? I mean,
unless you're Shaq.
Let's just be honest about the reality of what these things actually are. But
right.
Regardless of all that, regardless of the merits of the law, the way it works is that what's determined to be a rifle or a shotgun in this scenario is not based on the diameter of the barrel or the caliber of ammunition that it fires. It's based instead on the idea that the firearm is designed and intended to be shouldered, to be pressed against your shoulder when you're firing it. And so if the gun is not designed and intended to be shouldered, it's not a short barrel rifle or shotgun, even if it's literally identical to a short barrel shotgun or rifle when it has, a different stock attached to it, right? Does that make sense?
No, it does. In fact, if any of our viewers are on, if you're a viewer, you're on the app, obviously. There is a new video up in the last week or so of John Correa testifying in a criminal case in Michigan, I think it was, and discussing this very topic. The guy was charged with homicide, and one of the lesser included charges, we mentioned that, we'll call back to earlier in this interview, one of the lesser included charges was in fact that he had an SBR, and it was a state regulation or state law outlawing short-barreled rifles. And John went in and picked apart the ATF report about it. And if you guys want to watch that, I think it's very, very interesting. It's very Law and Order. It's on the app. You can go check it out there. I'm not sure if it's going to be put out on the main channel or the extra channel, but it's on the app for sure, and it's worth watching. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Right. But so, the bottom line with this is the pistol brace was invented as a way to take an AR platform gun or something similar with a short barrel that's under 16 inches. That's the cutoff in the NFA, and have something that you can put on the back of it. Because you can, before pistol braces were a thing, people would still buy basically the same exact kind of gun, then they just wouldn't put a stock on it at all. They would put nothing on the buffer tube. And that was and still is considered not a short barrel rifle by the ATF, right? That's one of their solutions in the rule is to just get rid of your brace, and that the gun itself, the actual shooty parts of the gun, wouldn't be a short barrel rifle at that point because it's no longer designed or intended to be shouldered. And so when Alex Bosco first made these braces in 2012, they're designed to strap to your forearm. That's why there's a strap on a lot of them. Obviously, there's different designs out there these days, but the initial designs and many of the subsequent ones have a strap that is intended to be put around your forearm while you hold the gun to stabilize the gun for one-handed shooting. And the ATF said at the time, that's fine. This is not a short barrel rifle. It's not an NFA item with this configuration of this brace on here. And they said that basically for 10 years until now. And now they're saying because a lot of people, even though it's not designed or intended to be shouldered, a lot of people did shoulder braced guns, obviously. And there was the ATF tried to have a weird middle ground where they claimed that touching the brace to your shoulder constituted a redesign of it by the end user and made it into an SBR at that moment. And then I guess as soon as it came off your shoulder, it was no longer, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about when we're getting in the middle of the whole pistol brace fight. But But yeah, so that's what this is all about. And it can be very technical, but at the end of the day, the practical implication is that millions of these devices were sold with, already attached to guns during that 10-year period, tens of millions, really, depending on the estimate you look at. Even the Congressional Research Service puts it at 10 to 40 million. The ATF itself puts it at 3 to 7 million. So ATF said they'd only registered about 250,000, meaning there are millions of these guns out there.
I'm genuinely shocked they got that many to register, if I'm being honest.
Sure, but I mean, they waived the tax, so it was free to register. It was another way they tried to incentivize it. Because normally,
thanks, government.
That's a whole nother conversation. But the NFA is a tax, right? The idea of this law is that it's a tax on these kinds of guns, and you have to get a special stamp and register the gun with the government to show that you paid the tax. But in this situation, they're waiving the tax part, but still making you do the registration part that shows you paid the tax. Kind of some internal conflict there, but which is actually part of the legal fight against the ban, which is affected by this whole resolution failing issue that is at the core of what we're talking about here. It's bad politically because it was meant to make Democrats look disjointed on the issue, make Biden have to repeal something or veto something that his people in his own party voted for. Instead, obviously that didn't happen. Democrats all hung together. He doesn't have to veto it now, but also it has a negative impact on the legal case too.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it doesn't. The idea here was in the legal case against the brace ban. It's not really centered around the Second Amendment. People might assume that that's what the legal fight's over, but really it's more like the bump stock ban, where it's centered around whether or not the ATF has the authority to reclassify things the way that they're doing, right? Like I mentioned earlier that for 10 years, they said this isn't an NFA item with these braces on it. And now they're saying the opposite thing. And
if you go look at John's testimony, he points out the sort of the vague nature of some of these rules they put out, and how they could be interpreted a bunch of different ways. And then about how it's so inconsistent over the years. He has like 3 different clarifications, in quotation marks, of this exact thing. And none of them seem to make any sense with the last one. So how's the average person supposed to keep up with this stuff? If you're not constantly following it, you just have one of these things. I can imagine there's a bunch of people who don't even know this is illegal now. That's possible.
Probably. Yeah. Probably millions of people, I would think. And that's actually at the core of the legal case. What you just described is there's a principle called the rule of lenity, where if it's vague as to how somebody is meant to comply with a certain regulation or law, if the people who are enforcing it can't figure it out,
right,
then you can't expect the average person to be able to figure it out, and therefore you can't bring criminal charges against somebody in that scenario. That's what the bump stock ban was struck down under. That and what's called the Administrative Procedures Act, which is a law that deals with the power of federal agencies. And so those are the 2 prongs that are the main legal attack on the pistol brace ban as well, which has been, enjoined by several federal judges in the Fifth Circuit already. And the reason that this resolution failing hurts the legal case there is that the Administrative Procedures Act portion of that case deals with whether or not Congress actually authorized the agency to do this thing that they did, right? So did Congress give the ATF the power to reclassify pistol braces as NFA items, or pistol braced guns as NFA items? And this resolution, what it's saying is that, no, we as Congress didn't give you permission. You're not doing this properly. And so when it passed the House, that bolsters the legal fight against it. When it fails in the Senate, that does probably have a negative impact. It's at least not the best outcome that it could have been, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so this leads me to my last point, which is, if you care about your Second Amendment rights, you got to get involved, and you got to vote and encourage others to vote, people who are like-minded, because, the Republicans lost the Senate because of a whole litany of reasons that I won't get into here. But it was a bit of a crap show last election cycle. Now we can debate that all day about election fraud or whatever. We don't do that here. The fact is they lost the Senate, and we see right now a real world consequence of that. I think somebody once said elections have consequences. Well, here you go. They do, and this is one of them. That is all the time we have this week. Folks, if you're lamenting the lack of down the middle, same sober reporting on the Second Amendment and all things gun related, do me a favor. You know what I'm about to say. Go over to thereload.com and carefully consider getting a membership. Steven relies on your membership dues to fund this important work. Nobody else out there is doing it. Steven, they're on to us. Everyone knows that every week you get the last word. So indeed, sir, you get the last word.
My closing statement, my closing argument this time around is going to be that don't worry too much about the Senate resolution not passing. It's not the end of the world. I don't think it's going to destroy the chances of the legal case winning out in the end. It's just a setback. So that's my final argument, Your Honor.
Very good. Steven, have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time.
Absolutely.